There we go.
All right.
All right. So it's been a while, folks.
Yeah.
What is going on? It has been a few weeks. What's happening?
What's happening?
Happy Sunday, everybody. It is April 30th, last day of the month of April, and we have a few days left of Mercury retrograde.
Did you enjoy and do it last week?
No, we did Easter.
Was it the week before? Okay, that's right. You had to do stuff last time. Okay.
Yep. So, welcome everybody. I'm Hamza.
I'm David.
And this is Intrinsic Motivation from a homie's perspective. And today, should I give it away? No, I don't want to give it away yet.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so we're going to talk about aliens. Do they really exist? Is there proof of aliens? And what's the homie's perspective on aliens? Yeah. But before getting into that, since we haven't spoken in a while, how's the last week been for you?
Last week has been good. I've been enjoying, especially the weather. The weather's been so nice. For me personally, been a good week.
Okay.
Yeah, no complaints.
Anything metaphysically you want to share with the audience?
It's interesting astral travel. Actually, I've been sleeping really well, so my astral travel has been
who I represent isn't protected by privilege. You could have found that in a court file.
Really crazy. Been dealing with a lot of lions.
Something I shouldn't have said, your evidence could get thrown out. Something I say comes back to bite my client, then I'm not getting sued. However,
I don't know why.
Okay.
That happens to me every so often. I'll be places where there's a lot of lions.
Nice.
Yeah, they're not harming me or anything, but they're just there, just present.
Do you want to share the transmedium story?
No, I don't.
You don't want to share
that?
Yeah,
that's a little too. Yeah, I don't want to share that.
You don't want to share that with folks?
No. He's right there.
What I'm doing right now as he's talking, he's talking about lion. And for those that do know about shamanism, I always use this as a cheat sheet. This is the Animal Speak Pocket Guide by Ted Andrews. He's huge in the industry, and this is a good pocket guide of anytime you have animals in your spirit, or you run across animals, or you see them all the time, you might want to get this book. It's less than $10. You can get them at Amazon, I'm sure, probably like $1, and it shows you what the spiritual aspect of that animal that you saw.
Well,
so when you're looking at lions, it does not talk. Okay, it says that you're into strength of will.
What do you mean? The Cardinals photos. My colleague.
It says intuition is working. Now it's time for strength of will, patience, and creative imagination. Do not force anything, which is kind of apropos of what we were just talking about, and that's off air, and that's why you're having the lions. So there's your acknowledgement from the universe of some of the questions you're having. You need to have patience with regards to manifestation.
Patience and trust.
And trust, yeah, trust you.
And I certainly didn't do anything as interesting as status suicide. Explain the principle.
Universe.
Okay, yeah.
So think about that when
And threatened a restraining order. I wanted him to know that I'd see it. It was all. And it all happened in front of the restaurant inside of the bar.
we talk about aliens too, because there has to be patience and there has to be trust too, right?
Yeah.
So I don't want to jump into that right yet, because I want to talk about my week.
Think you're flipping, man. But you knocked something over when you broke into his office. Yeah. Got the coffee.
A little bit in that.
How was your week?
Last Sunday, I actually did some shape shifting. So it was really cool to
Ooh.
go into different environments like immediately after. So for those that don't know, there was my sister. My sister had she committed suicide last year, and the person that a good friend of mine, her daughter had committed suicide a couple years before. So there's this big suicide group that meets once a year, and you know, family members come around, and everybody shares their story. And so you know, it's a very somber event, right? And so I had to leave that immediately
We need more and as quickly as possible. What do you mean? Well, according to his calendar, he's leaving tonight. 3 days a week.
after and go way across town to go to my little's. He had an event. He's in a jazz group.
And for people that don't know, your little is.
Oh yeah, I'm in the Big Brother Big Sister program. So I've been with my little since he was 7, and he's 15 now. So
Wow, 8 years?
yeah,
I
man.
thought it was something you had just started making the past couple years.
Nah,
Wow.
man,
So
it's
you
really
watched him
interesting.
grow up. Wow.
What's really funny, because as we talk about aliens today, when I first met him, he wanted to be a part of NASA.
Oh.
Right, and so you know, we'll see how he goes as time goes on for that. But so anyway, he was in a jazz group, and these guys were phenomenal. Right, he's in a magnet school, and they were better than some professionals that I've actually paid money to see.
Wow.
I mean, they were great.
What instrument does he play?
He plays trombone, he plays clarinet, and he plays the horn.
Okay.
Right, and so they were phenomenal. But I said it was shape shifting because I had to immediately change, like I had never been to the suicide event earlier. That was really somber, and it was just really good to change my energy just as quickly, because you can see the high school energy of the whole life ahead of them, and
Yeah.
right, they have so much promise right before kind of life gets in the way, and you know, what happened to
Smacks
me.
you around a little bit.
Yeah, and it was phenomenal for that. It was phenomenal. So I definitely wanted to share that with the group before getting into it. But let's jump right into it, because you wanted to talk about aliens, right? We haven't talked about that yet.
Was that? Was that you? You won't be leaving the country tonight after all. Whose phone did you want? To burn it. After I hang up, I'll burn it. Quite literally. Maybe if I have it 1 hour, I have much to discuss.
I look at aliens from two different standpoints. And the timing of this talk is really, I think, appropriate. And I think it's appropriate because of the time of year. It's spring, and you know, with spring comes new beginning, and then you have summer, right? And that's when all of the propaganda for alien knowledge really comes out. Like in the movies, you have all the superhero movies. All that comes out in the spring and summer, right?
Yeah.
And then in the winter, you have like the death type movies, or fear, or vampire type movies, like Underworld and all that. That comes around December and January. So it's just really interesting to talk about
I
that.
never noticed
now.
that, but yeah, okay.
Yeah. And the other thing I do want to highlight is, and this is probably going to be my approach over this talk, is I remember in 1995, shout out to Will Smith, right? Will Smith was on Top of the World back then, and they had the movie Independence Day. Independence Day came out, and at the time I was I was in college and I was a finance major, so I was working at Schwab and Merrill Lynch at the time. So every day I had to watch the news and World News Tonight and all that, right? So in addition to watching Independence Day, I never forget Peter Jennings on World News Tonight. And he was just like, look, people at the end of the show, he's like, look, stop calling the show. Aliens are not coming to destroy the world. Like there was so much panic behind Independence Day. Is this really going to happen? And he was like, guys, it's a movie.
It's a movie,
But people were so immersed into the movie and they had so much fear behind aliens that I think that's why we're going to talk about it. And it came out in the summer. And what I noticed was the year after that, Men in Black came out. And it was more of a comedy. So it was the same subject matter, but they had to bring levity to it so that people can absorb it without the fear being associated to it. So some of the stuff we're probably gonna go off the rails a little bit, but my job I think is going to bring a lot of levity to the conversation to bring light into it because I think it can go off into the rails of fear very quickly. And we lose people, right?
Yeah.
So without jumping into it, why did you want to talk about aliens today?
Well, I don't know. It just kind of came to me. It's something that, we've been talking about, what we've been talking about over the past, 5-6 weeks. And it just seemed, to me, it's all energy, it's all spirit, just another expression of it. So it was just like, all right, let's talk about aliens.
Okay, all right.
That's it. That was that simple.
That simple. Hey, we'll run with it. So there are a lot of ways that we can go with it. What's your first experience of the subject matter?
The first experience, probably, wow, that's a good question. I can't really think of, I can remember when I was really young, my grandmother and I being out on her porch and looking up at the sky. It was dark, checking out the stars and talking about that. Like, oh, how cool would it be if an alien came down and we got to talk to it and hang out or something like that. That's when I was pretty young, single digits age-wise. And then after that, probably media, like a movie, and you have discussions with it. And obviously now we're in the information age, so you can do, there's a lot of stuff out there. People are putting out their experiences and stuff. But probably there's a lot of things. I can't really think of the timelines. I can remember working with a guy that said when he was about 10 years old, they were driving. It was him and his cousin and his mother and his aunt. And they came across this field, and there was this craft hovering out in the middle of the field. And there were other cars that had pulled over and stopped to see what was going on. And they got out, and everyone was just kind of like checking it out. It was just hovering. Then he said, next thing you knew, it just started to go up, and then it just went up so fast you can't even imagine it was gone. And they all looked at each other, didn't know what to say. Anyway, his mother said, don't you ever tell anyone about what you saw here. So when they get to their grandma, his grandmother's house, the first thing he did was he get out of the car and run in. And grandma, I guess, you know, stuff like that. So, you know, that's just one. It's so. It was just kind of a graduating thing where I'm checking. Out stuff on the internet as the internet came along, you know, reading stories. It's just a whole bunch of stuff, but I can't probably really remember the very first thing. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I know for me, and whenever I say this publicly, people want to throw eggs because when I remember my first experience with Star Wars, I actually fell asleep. So you know,
fell asleep during Star Wars.
Exactly, and people were like, "Yo," and then by default, I became a Trekkie. Like I really started watching Star Trek behind it, and going back, you know, I enjoy Star Wars and such, but you know, I think that was the first thing I can remember as a child. And then, as I mentioned earlier about the whole Peter Jennings talking about the fear, there was a lot of fear behind E.T.
Yeah.
When E.T. first came out, there was a lot of fear behind that.
The Fourth Kind, what was that movie?
Yeah, Close Encounters.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I remember that came out. That was like kind of a scary movie at that time. It's like, wow, you know what's going. Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of fear around the subject matter, and it's why, right? Yeah. Because from a homie's perspective, you have to look at. We've always been seen as outliers anyway, and not being a part of the main society, and it just could be ignorance of not having a knowledge. So when you have an ignorance of the unknown, if it's unknown, it's alien, right? So our president is telling us about what's unknown over in Mexico. So maybe we need to build a bridge. We need to build a wall because there's aliens over in Mexico that's going to overcome, right? So there's fear behind that. There's fear. I mean, obviously, I'm bringing levity to this, but there's fear of the unknown. There's fear of. I think I was listening to Bill Maher the other day, and they were talking about fear, and they were saying fear of Mexico, fear of China. You better fear automation, right? That's what you should fear instead of what's propagated in the media. Yeah. And so I just remember when and like you said as a kid, in that story, the mom said, "Don't tell anybody," and you wanted to tell somebody immediately. Yeah. So what happens as a result is when there's such fear, people huddle into these little circles in your neighborhood and now on the web, and you share this information, and it's like, wow, how come everybody doesn't know about it? And it's because there's association with the fear. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So,
but it's interesting. Like I say. This is the information age, and there's so much out there now. You can either Google or YouTube people talking, and you just hear the most interesting stories. And a lot of people don't know this, but there was a story that back in, I think it was the 70s, Nixon took, what was that one actor's name? Oh my God, what's his name? The one that he'd always say, "I'm sending you to the moon." It was back in the 60s.
To the moon, Alice?
Yeah.
The Honeymooners?
Yeah, what was that guy's name?
Ralph Camden?
No, the real actor, the guy, the heavyset guy with the say that. What was his name? Jackie Gleason?
Okay.
Yeah. That Nixon, he was friends with Nixon, and Nixon told him one day, I want to show you something, took him to a secured base and showed him an alien.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, maybe it might have been one of the Roswell ones, and dead alien, and because I guess they still had the body. And after that point in time, I guess Gleason didn't believe in any of that, and that kind of blew him away. So much so that he built a house that was the shape of a UFO.
Okay.
A lot of people don't know that. That's a true story, that he built a house like that.
Okay.
And so it's still wherever. I mean, obviously he's passed away, but so much so that he built a house and it was the shape of a UFO. Because up to that point in time, he had no belief in it. And then when Nixon showed him that. Now, whether Nixon actually did that, I have no idea. But that's the story. And because of that experience is why he built the house.
Sure. I mean, we can go down a rabbit hole with that because, you know, Nixon is known as being part of MK Ultra and a lot of being in the elites and mind control and sharing of information. So I think what happens where, especially when you talk about the subject matter and you just mentioned, is proof. Like if people don't see the evidence or proof, then does the phenomena really exist?
Yeah.
And so you have two different things to think about as well. I mentioned before fear, right? And in all the movies, there's the probe and they're taken away from the family and there's abduction and like the worst case scenarios you think about. And now it's like if you have proof or evidence, would you really want to share it? Because what's associated with it?
Yeah, what's associated with it. Yeah.
Right? So that's another conversation because as much as we're on the web and we're on Periscope now and YouTube and such, and we know that these sites are all monitored because they want to see what the subject matter is about it. And they're going to be like, no, let's look at my backyard because I saw alien. You're going to get some knocks on the door, right? By dark black vans.
Yeah.
So do you really want that to happen?
Yeah.
Right? So
the Men in Black.
The Men in Black is the issue of proof or evidence, I think, will be ongoing. And I think that it's a scary place right now because if there was more of embracing, because I think it exists throughout time, or at least recorded time, right? But now if you bring it out, you could be criminalized, right? Because you're doing a biblical class, and I know you talk about Ezekiel's will. I mean, there's countless takes of alien life in the Bible.
Yeah.
Right? So you want to talk about any of
that?
Plus,
it's just like hieroglyphics too, I think. Some
hieroglyphics
still have stuff in the air. Like, well, what is that? There was no flying stuff until the Wright brothers. Well, that's not true. And they'll find ancient batteries and all kinds of stuff like that. Yeah, I think there's plenty of evidence that where it's been going on, they've been visiting, for who knows how long, eons, thousands of years and whatnot. One of the things I always find funny is, well, maybe it's just more media, but it's like when there's ever this threat, it's like, okay, we're going to get our army and our planes and we're going to fight them. I'm like, what, are you kidding me? You have people that are traveling from distant galaxies. That technology is so far and above everything we have. You think you're going to be able to just shoot them down and that's going to be the end of it? No, I don't think so. Obviously, if they are coming from other galaxies, that technology in itself, is eons past where we're at. And so what that makes me think of is who knows how capable they are and what they could do.
Now you mentioned something about in the past and it being in the hieroglyphics and such, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is one argument that they helped create the human race, right? We're hybrids of that.
Yeah, from the Anunnaki.
From the Anunnaki. So if that's the case, then that means that happened in the past and all we're doing, it's kind of like a family reunion. So we're having a reunion of people that helped create us.
Yeah.
I mean, do you want to go down that rabbit hole?
Well, I mean, there could be some truth to that. I mean, I guess this just depends on who you're talking to. I'm at a point where everything's out on the table and nothing, I can't, all bets are off, I guess you could say. As far as this is how it is, because how many times have we decided, well, this is how it is, and then something comes along and completely changes. Oh, you know what? We were wrong when we thought that. So, I guess you really can't discount anything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Well, we're in 2017, so I'm just going to be linear with this line of thought.
okay.
So, when I talked about Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, ET, that was the late 70s, early 80s, right? So during that time in the media, there was more of a fear of abduction, and you had the lines in the what do you call those circles in the
Yeah, it's crop circles
and all,
Yeah.
and there was a huge fear. Now, if you listen or look on the web, there's more of a conversation. There's people reaching back out to people that were originally abducted, and they are no longer have that fear, right? Like they more so are saying, and this is the George Norrie and listen to those type of radio shows, coast to coast, and they talk to some of those people, and they're like, you know what, I had a fear back then because it was unknown. Today, I realize it was more of a hybrid. If they lost their kid and the kid came back and they're like, well, the kid can't be here because of the way its physical makeup, it can't survive here.
Yeah.
But they're coming back to help us elevate to another level. So if you look at the past year or the past century, especially we were talking about this yesterday with all of the strides of advancement with technology and such. You talk about Tesla and all of his discoveries that are actually being implemented now. It's like, well, how did you get that information? Well, did you get that information in a dream? Well, was that your future you giving you that information so that you can advance?
Yeah.
And so you can tell, like, if you break the last century in half, there was greater advancements in the last 50 years versus the first.
The first, from the previous thousands, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So there could be the conversation of, you know what, we're moving too slowly and things need to actually escalate.
Yeah.
And that could be the argument of the current scary environment with what's going on with the other countries. I don't want to name them because then we'll get blocked off the throw us off the podcast. But right, if
you name another country,
different. No, I'm talking about with the United States fighting another country with the impending nuclear war that's in the news right now.
Oh, okay.
So I don't want to talk about it because we'll get bumped off the podcast.
That's what I'm saying. We'll get bumped off if we mention it.
Absolutely. Yeah, you don't know about the buzzwords. You can't mention Bill Clinton's wife or any of that stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, you'll get bumped off, man. So I've seen other people get bumped off. I don't want that to happen to us. So, we only talk about once a week. So we've already been off for 2 weeks. So I just want to keep the conversation going.
So if I say I love North Korea, we'll get bumped off?
Jesus Christ, man. Or I said Jesus Christ. Or Jesus Christ is an alien. So, right. There's the argument of, wow, if it's accelerated, then maybe that's where you're going to have more communication. Because if we use that same timeline in that argument of 1950 to 2000, that was after the Second World War, right? And that was after Tesla died and we started using all his information. So it wasn't just Tesla's information. It was, wow, what type of communication has been happening behind closed doors? And so it becomes a control factor of, hey, are we going to use this for military might? Yeah. Or is it going to be for the benefit of humankind?
Yeah, because there's always been the stories that our presidents, going back as far as, I don't know, maybe Eisenhower or maybe before that, have been in contact with aliens and just whatever deals they've worked out. Who knows? But have you ever heard the story of the aliens over the White House or UFOs over the White House?
Well, the argument is, I'll let you tell the story, but the argument is...
Well, I don't really know it that well. I just know at a time, supposedly there was these, and it was in the paper and everything, 50s, 40s or 50s?
Well, the argument, if you think about it, is how the United States was formed, or the formation of the United States of America after 1776, and you look at the dollar bill and all that, right? It's a lot of Egyptology on it. And so there is an argument that Washington, D.C. is the modern age Egypt, right? So, I mean, that's where business is done outside of New York, right? In Wall Street.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't argue that point. I would say, okay, well, just show me the evidence and we can talk about it.
Yeah.
Because most people are going to Egypt today, and it's kind of stuck in time. It's not as progressive as it is here in the States, right? So you can have the argument of taking information. Obviously, that's a whole nother conversation about the after 9/11, that a lot of the religious areas were decimated. So when people go in the future, they won't be able to find any of that information that had existed thousands of years because of those wars. Right? So you can say the argument could be, well, the information was taken and now it's in the United States and New Mexico and Washington, D.C., and so on and so forth. Right? So I think that's where that would go as far as evidence, because, again, with the fear factor, I think the fear factor still exists today with any movies and such about any of this subject matter. So without any levity to it, there's going to be panic. Right? So is there going to be panic because of distractions? And the only way we can get people to come. Come in is because we have to distract them with maybe another potential war, and then that way we'll ease that in, because that's what happened after the towers fell. Even after 9/11, we gave away our rights, right? And that was so we can have more surveillance. So you have arguments of even chemtrails. Does chemtrails slow down the information that we're supposed to receive, right? Because we're either on our phones with all electronics every day, 24 hours. And then when you go out in nature, the chemtrails are blocking that information. So there could be more communication that we're actually supposed to have right now, but we're being impeded. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah. So, have you ever seen a UFO?
I have not.
Yeah. I have by definition.
Okay.
I didn't know what it was.
Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, well, there was a time in the early 90s where I was house sitting and for someone that lived up in the mountains. So, of course, when you live up in the mountains on the summit, the sky is just, you wouldn't believe how many stars are out there when you get out of the city. Oh my God, it's crazy. So anyway, every single night, we would go out and we'd just stand up there and look, and we'd see. Now, some people say, "Oh, it was just a satellite." Man, maybe it was, but I've talked to people about satellites, and they're moving and stuff. But these things, it looked just like any star. So if it were to stop, you couldn't distinguish that between anything else in the sky. It would just be like a star just sitting there, what looked like one, and then it would just start moving. Then it would stop, then go this direction, stop, maybe hang out for a while, start moving this direction, then go this way. I don't think satellites move like that. I'm not sure. Do you know how they move? I think they just keep kind of going. But anyway, then it might just turn off, just blink, just go off like you hit a switch. So then inevitably a plane would be in the night, night sky. You say, okay, clearly that's a plane. But there's these things, I don't know what they were. I don't know. And you see them every night. If you sit there and just look and just kind of fixate on one part of the sky, through your peripheral, you'll notice something kind of moving. Then you look at that and you'll see it. It's moving really slow. And you're like, oh, it's moving. It's moving real slow. Then it'll stop. And then it just blends in with everything else. That's what it looks like. It looks like any other star. And then all of a sudden it'll just start moving. And so I don't know what it was. I'm not saying it was a UFO. I'm just saying it was something that I couldn't identify.
Now that's why we have the intrinsic motivation from a homie's perspective. Because in the mass media, you don't see anybody that looks like us that talks about any of the subject matter as far as aliens or even having an encounter. And so for a homie's perspective, I have to give a shout out to A Tribe Called Quest. So I'm mad at anybody that watches this video if you do not have the newest Tribe Called Quest album, because it's all of that. It's just as good as all the other ones. It's probably even better because they are really refined.
I don't have it, and you're mad at me?
I'm mad at you because
okay.
the first song of the album, of the new album, they're talking about space exploration, and they're like, "Yo, how come in all the movies we're never in them, and we're the first ones to die and all?" And so you would think that no one that looks like us has any interaction. And what you're saying is potentially it could be like we've had previous conversations about angel worship or even speaking with the angels.
Yeah.
They're far away from you because you're not really allowing them to come in.
Yeah.
So you have to acknowledge them and say, "Hey, I'm okay with this," right?
Yeah.
And now I can have greater communication. Whereas if you have a fear, they're not going to interfere in your space because you have seniority, right? And because you have that seniority, you're not allowing them to take over you. And I'd like to go into that next because we were talking about seniority and the potential of worship of something that could be detrimental to you.
Okay.
So I want to talk about seniority.
So yeah, well, we were talking earlier off air about that, and in going back in time's history, who knows as far as you have, let's say, these beings visiting Earth, and they have these abilities and or powers and stuff to the people at that present time. At that time, they could identify them as gods. And who knows? And they might have said, "Oh yeah, that's right, we're gods, and do this, do that, and whatever." And so who knows? Throughout history, anything that's written, it could have been something. It could have been aliens, but it was just interpreted or identified as gods or God.
So you're
talking
saying
to them or whatever.
So you're saying that in the Bible, potentially, that's why there's a jealous God, because they're not the actual creator.
Yeah, it could be.
They'd be jealous if you're worshiping their buddy or their uncle instead of them.
Instead of them, exactly. Could be. I mean, it's like just here on Earth, we see countries invading one another, and that's what's the history of this planet, and we've seen that. So what's to say that a race or aliens from another planet, galaxy, whatever, could come to ours and nothing's going to be done about it? Maybe it's just part of the whole makeup of what I'm saying is, like, when someone invades a country, you don't necessarily see God come in and say, "Hey, what are you doing? Stop that." So what's to keep it from another race coming to our planet and invading on whatever level and just allowing that to happen?
So you're saying, based off of the history of the United States, which was the history has been very violent, right? Because was it really America, and there's that whole conversation. So that's where the root of the fear is, because if we were able, or the founding fathers took over the native people here, they were obviously smarter at the time, and so they could outmaneuver them. And so the fear is, well, they're smarter than us, they're giving us this technology, then they would do the same to us, so we could potentially be food or slaves ourselves, right? Based off of what you just said. So that makes sense of why there would be fear, but it also begs to mention that should something happen, how would there be a general acceptance, because there's so much fear around it? It would have to be like on American Idol or aliens dancing with the stars to be acceptable.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's also the thought that people and more have come forward saying this is what they had experiences with, being abducted and whatever. But you have like kind of two sides to it. People have some positive, good experiences, and there's other people that have had, horrific. They're being probed and whatever was going on. So maybe that there's two different kinds, classes of type of, aliens. Also, you have people that have said that their experience, the aliens had human bodies, not the little, tiny ones with the big eyes that we see like in the movies and whatnot. So who knows the different, all the different types. The lizard type, reptile, I guess they call it, reptilian, yeah. The ant people. I mean, I've heard so many different stories, so it's really, I find it so fascinating and interesting, and at the same time, it's like there's so much information, you just don't know which direction to go. It's like, wow, sometimes you kind of get overloaded with all these different, theories or whatever.
Well, it makes me also think of how far we've come technologically, right? And how far we've come as far as devastation, because if you look at all the endangered species or all the species that are extinct, right, based off of what we're doing, like right now. I have this is my little soapbox moment, then we can get back to aliens, right? So my big thing is I have two sisters that live overseas, right? So overseas, they have all their food is labeled GMO, right? I mean, if it has GMO in their food, they have to label it, right? Like it's a given. But in the States, half of the food isn't labeled, right? And they're reluctantly doing that. And so right now, there's a huge thing with bees getting extinct. You don't see bees anymore, right?
Yeah.
And so there's this huge argument against Monsanto and Bayer and those that have nicotine into the pesticides that are killing the bees, right? Well, overseas they're fighting to not use that in the soil anymore, whereas in the States it's still big. And I'm saying that to say today we can say, oh, remember when there were a lot of bees and we got stung by bees? But our grandchildren may not know about bees. Yeah. So that means that there's tons of species that are no longer on the planet that once roamed this planet. And so there could be tons of foreign bodies that are unknowns to known to us that exist, that because we do not know anything about it, that's where that fear comes in again, right? So the other thing I like to talk about is, why are we looking outside of ourselves, right? Like from our experience, we know how to channel and we know how to get in touch with our angels and such. So there's that relationship, and that it shows that's your higher self. Most people in this community say higher self, right? So there's the argument that aliens also, if we are on the same timelines, well, maybe they were in the future and they're just coming back to us. So it's the future us coming to talk to us. So you're actually scared of your higher self, potentially.
Oh my God, I'm so scary.
Right? And they're like, look, I'm trying to talk to you. Like, that's what some of the argument is today, or even on the web. It's like, well, I don't have that fear of them anymore over 30 years because they've shown me that it's me.
Yeah.
Right? I'm here to help you. Or like people I like Bashar and stuff. He's 300 years into the future. So because he's unknown to the natural person day to day, that's his future self. So that that would be considered alien.
You know, that's interesting to say that future self, because, and once we're done with the podcast, I'll find it and see if I can find it and show you on YouTube. But there's this YouTube video of this guy that says that he met his future self, and believe it or not, he was under his sink doing a repair. I think that was leaking, and found some kind of portal or something underneath there. Anyway, long story short, I don't know if he went through it or whatever, but he met, and the guy looks just like him, but an older version of him. Same tattoo in the same place, everything. And he was convinced. He goes, "This is me, like, 50 years from now or whatever the hell."
Sure.
And they, took a photo, and I don't remember the rest of the story, but it was on YouTube.
Okay.
But that's the essence of the story. He met his future self. He
Sure.
was like, 30-something years older or whatever.
Yeah, I like it makes me think of the Disney movie with Bruce Willis. I think it was in the 90s, where he's an exec and, he comes back to his inner child. And would you do the same things, right? He's totally different than the inner child. Right? Excuse me, there's countless stories of that, right? Where I'll talk about this in the marketing community. There's a software out where we don't even go 300 years out into the future. We do a month. So what it is let's just imagine, not really us, because guys don't talk like that, but if you're talking with a girl or something and she has an issue and she's how was your day going, and she's talking about somebody did something at work or whatever, not to belittle that right, to whoever's listening to this, but you're just having a conversation, and so you're listening to that person, and then after they shared how they felt, and then you may give your insight, and they listen, and you have that dialogue. It goes back and forth, right? So by that same framework, what we do is we go 30 days in advance, right? So 30 days, since it's the end of the month, you look at June, right? So June 1, you're having a conversation with yourself as June 1, right? And so you're having that conversation, and you have to write this down, or you would do it. There's a software that we use, but you can actually write it down. So you're actually having a conversation like, I have an issue about blah, 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 right? And then under it, it would be yourself 30 days from now answering it. And if you get into the exercise of doing that, you're actually, because you're doing it in the present. So you're bringing your present self, your future self into the present, that's overcoming an issue that you might potentially have. I'm saying that for your lying issue because you had that in the dream, but also for people that are listening that may not have done that before. So when we talk about alien, it may be extravagant or out there for shock value, but from a human practical standpoint, don't go 300 years into the future. Don't think about ET. Don't think about all that. Think of yourself 30 days from now and have communication with yourself. Once you start building that up, you're going to see that you're going to manifest a lot more. And then you could potentially go out 60 days or 90 days and then ultimately do like a 300 days. I think where the fear is people can't make that leap. They can't make that leap. Or the jump. I would say jump because we can go into that next about jumping. But it is in essence a jump. You're making a jump or a leap of faith, right? You're whoa, I don't know what's going to happen a month from now, but if that's me, what would I do? And I'm talking to myself, right? So if myself's coming up with this answer, it'll be really interesting because most people aren't used to doing that. You're going to stretch your muscle. It's a new muscle, and you're going to be like, wow.
So would you say what you're talking about is similar to like when we've had conversations in the past in regards to relationship, and I say, hey, you meet someone, you really like them, fast forward.
Absolutely.
Is that the same thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. Potentially, because you can see what's there. I think the difference there is that everyone's on their own timeline. So when Abraham says that we live in a perfect world, there's nothing wrong, I would tend to agree with that because everyone's on a different plane, right? So if you do that with another person, you don't necessarily know how they're going to do, because humans are unpredictable. Even when we listen to channeling from Tom Kenyon or Barbara Melchizedek or any of these, when they talk about the Pleiadians and such, they always say the human race is so unpredictable, right? Like they've been talking what is it? what is it? The universal cosmic convergence
Yeah.
of 1987. I mean, that was 30 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And so if you listen to some of those talks, it's like, well, a lot of that stuff came to happen, right? Or some of it did not happen. And so for them, they're not on our timeline, so it could be like a minute to them, and we're like, well, how come it hasn't happened yet?
Yeah.
Right? And they're like, it did happen. You're like, well, it was 30 years.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, now we're playing on timelines, right?
Yeah.
But even the exercise that I'm talking about, it's just baby steps of playing in the timeline. And I think once people can do that as an exercise, the fear wouldn't be as great when we talk about something so foreign or alien such as communication.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So you were talking about jumping, and we could talk a little bit about it now.
Have you seen that movie?
Yes.
Jumper?
Yes, Jumper.
Yeah.
Yes.
I like that movie.
We were at a psychic fair yesterday with a guest that we may have next week, so I don't want to give away too much. But we were talking about jumping, and we were talking about Burt Goldman. He had a course out about 8 years ago, talk about quantum jumping. It was kind of like what I was talking about for the business world, and you were doing it along different timelines. So you were just jumping about something you wanted to manifest, and you had that in that timeline, and you just brought it back to this timeline. But I know we were talking a little bit about Project Pegasus, where they were jumping timelines, and one was they were in the future.
And they were using children too, right?
Yes, they were using children, which was interesting today if you think about it. And those that haven't looked up Project Pegasus, I highly recommend looking at it before all that stuff gets taken down. Because at some point, I think it will get taken down. They want to see what the tea leaves are out there. I think people.
I guess because you'd think this guy talking about this stuff, you'd think if they would have shut him down or wouldn't want him revealing all that stuff what they were doing. And this
I disagree. I think that.
Okay.
Yeah, I disagree because I think that these platforms that we have are used as surveillance. So they want to see what the tea leaves are. How are people going to respond to it? Oh, there's no response.
Yeah.
But we can do something else.
Yeah.
Right? Because by that same token, I think the media is used that way. I used Peter Jennings. I used Independence Day. I used E.T. I didn't talk about it yet, but if you look at even with, and I'll go back to Project Pegasus in a minute, but if you look at The Matrix showed, hey, we're all in this matrix, right? And it's being surveilled, right? And then a couple years later, you have Facebook where everything's surveilled, right? Everything that's done, everything's monitored and seeing how people are responding. So you can see that with an election. You can see that with civil unrest. We want to see how people are going to respond. Yeah. And now we have a dedicated response to their response.
Yeah.
So I think with the Project Pegasus and any of that, they want to see what people are talking about. Like for our channel, Intrinsic Motivation from a homie's perspective, how would they even talk about that? Like we should be talking about like rims or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, no, keep it out there. And so the other one I want to talk about as far as projection is Tom Cruise. If you watch any of Tom Cruise movie, they always give you clues of what the future is going to be. But in 2006, you have Minority Report, right? And in Minority Report, they were jumping into their cars, and it was self-driving and such, right? And in 2016, you have self-driving, or 27 cars, you have self-driving cars. Yeah. But I'm bringing it up because in the news, I think it was last week or the week before, we're starting to see the demos of the inner city from, not inner city of your inner city, but the lower, below the surface city that Elon Musk is doing in California. So, and when you look at the demos, and if you haven't, go to TechCrunch and look at the demos for people that are watching this, and you'll see it's a mirror image of Minority Report, right? And I'm bringing it up because of the quantum jumping, because when you look at Project Pegasus, in Mars, when they did the jump to Mars is so devastating you can't live on the surface. Yeah. So all that life is underground.
Yeah.
And in his talk, a lot of the makeup of underground is like a Minority Report, is like in California with what Elon Musk is doing. So you're seeing these mirror images in not popular media, because what I'm talking about is not mainstream, but it is once you start looking at it. But I think all that relates to is it just our future selves that's coming back to help us out to take us to the next progression, right? That could be alien to some people or just unknown.
Well, that's interesting that when you're talking about the jumping to Mars, because I haven't listened to Coast in quite a while, but there was a time because of the schedule, my work schedule, it happened to be on when I was on my way to work. So anyway, and they were talking once about this kid who lived in Russia, who was like 7 years old, and the story goes, it was with adults and they were doing some camping. And at one point in time, he got all the adults' attention and said, I want everyone to come over here because I want to talk to you. So everyone's like, oh, okay, whatever. So they go over and they sit around like a campfire type thing. And the kid starts talking about in a previous life, he used to live on Mars. Okay. And he started talking about that, all the trips that they would make from Mars to the Earth. That was a regular thing for his trade and whatnot. He started talking about the propulsion system of the craft that they used. All kinds of astronomical stuff that no 7-year-old would know, real highly technical stuff. And people were like, well, he just read it somewhere and read. No, I don't think so. He even could speak the language. You know, he would say something, and what is that? He's all, that means whatever in whatever language and stuff. Me, it was just the most incredible story just to listen to. I mean, whether it was true or not, I have no idea. But for me, it's like, hey, to be a 7-year-old and to be that detailed in stuff that, you know, even the most physicists, it's like that level of information he had, you know, that physicists know as far as the constellations, this and that, you know, in propulsion systems. I mean, how many 7-year-olds you know about, you know stuff like that, or going to tell a group of adults, come over here so I can talk to you about this. I mean, it was interesting at the least.
Well, that's what I like about Project Pegasus, because the gentleman, and I forget his name right now, who's talking about that, is the reason why they use children is because they don't have the baggage that adults have. And so since they have that clean slate, so to speak, they can absorb so much more and give accurate information versus someone like you or I or any other adult. We have some life experiences. Yeah. So if we do the jump, either in the past or in the future, we're taking the knowledge that we have as, 30-plus-year-old people, adults, right? So it's actually convoluted, the information that you're bringing back, right? So from when you have those children that do it, it's a lot easier to get the right information because they don't have any filters. And if you think about it also, and that sounds right in life, because we've had experiences with even your mom's grandchildren, right, when they were so capable psychically, right, about 10 years ago, but now they're in their late teens and says they don't want anything to do with it. Yeah. And so when they, after 28 or, after 35, right, they may slowly come back around, yeah. But during this time of ego, right, ego's adolescence to about middle age, you're kind of cut off from all of that. Yeah. And so your information that you're sharing is really third dimensional, right? So that's why I believe children are easier to use for that.
Well, that would make sense, because you ever heard of the Montauk Project?
Yes.
Okay, did you read that book?
No.
Okay. Well, anyway, so there's a book by Bill Nell called The Montauk, and in that they were doing time travel and they were recruiting teenagers. Yeah, they weren't doing adults, they were recruiting teenagers to do the time traveling and stuff. So that's interesting that you say that they're like a whole younger, I don't know why they were doing teenagers, but I knew it was teenagers that they're mostly looking for.
Well, you look at it from a grooming standpoint, right? And what I'm going to say, people, I'm trying to bring levity to it, but anything that exists can be used for good or bad, right? So as a former educator, I remember children in second and first grade getting Ritalin, right? So if you have children that are on pharmaceuticals in early childhood, you could potentially have that child on pharmaceuticals their whole life. Yeah, right.
That's the goal.
That's the goal. So if that's from a negative standpoint as far as grooming. So even for people in the Montauk Project or Project Pegasus and such, a lot of them are groomed throughout their whole lives, right? Like there's people that became presidents or there's people that became high up in government, right? In the government because they were groomed as children.
Yeah.
So you want to get them started really young, even from a very banal part. Like let's just look at Tiger Woods or anyone that Michael Jordan. They were really groomed really young to hone their craft. That's why they're so good all these years later. Yeah. People think, oh, I'm 28 years old. I think I'm going to go into the NBA. Good luck. I mean, that's the reason why the books like Outliers exist. I mean, you got to put that 10,000 hours in. Yeah. But if you do it as a child and groom them to that, and then there has been at least reported in the Montauk Project and Pegasus where they were brainwashed and things like that, because if they're doing these jumps on some level, you still have, they're children. Yeah. So like you mentioned, there was an incident where the child saw a spaceship in the sky, and the mom said, "Don't tell anybody." And as soon as he saw Grandma, he's like, "Yo, Grandma!" Yeah. So you have some level of control where you have the Manchurian Candidate too, where these people are programmed.
Sleeper cells.
They're sleeper cells. Then they don't even know that they maybe jumped for 10 or 15 years when they were children.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think all of that plays in.
How did you come across the Pegasus Project? Just surfing around?
Yeah, just surfing around because I think there's no accident. So if you're following one thing, it may lead to something else. And I found that with people even watching our channel, they were like, "Hey, I was just watching Def Leppard," and then you guys, I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
And I think the algorithm always changes, especially like on YouTube. Like if you like this, you might also like that. This, and from that aspect, I appreciate it as a business person because you want to keep people on that platform, right? You don't want people to leave YouTube. So people like me, I watch everything in 2x and 1.5x, so everything's a lot faster, so I absorb more information. But I stay on their site, which is what they want. So that's how I found a lot of that information.
So kind of going back to originally what we were talking about, aliens, you said that you've never seen a UFO, so I take it you've never seen an alien.
I would say so. Yeah. Now this is funny. So I got to bring levity to this.
Okay, real quick. When I say alien, I'm talking about the big eyes type thing. Because personally, I have, in doing readings, I have read alien beings that had human bodies. Okay. But as spirit, they weren't like originally like from this planet. They maybe only had 2 or 3 chakras, or so they were alien spirit. Mm-hmm. As opposed to the body. I've never seen the body, but I have read alien beings before and seen that.
Well, my take on that is So my take on that is I like to use a story from Jane Roberts, right? So with Seth. And Seth had a story where, there was this, let's say, a religious zealot, okay? And the zealot had died. And so the zealot at the time thought he would reach paradise if he had done something in this life. And when he did, that's what he met when he transitioned, right? And then he was like, let's fight the enemy. And there was an enemy there. And what I'm saying is what we project is what we see, and it's what we're able to absorb. So if I think anyone could have met an alien at any point in time, they may not have known it because they were presented in a way that they were able to be not, quote unquote, digested, right? Or processed.
Handle it.
Right, so you can handle it. So there's a lot of talk that if your angels came all the way through, like, I mean, even in the Bible, that's why you have burning bush and such, right? Because people would you don't have the capacity in the third dimension density to absorb and process everything that's beyond what our physical eyes can see.
Yeah, so that kind of goes along with that saying that you never create more than you can handle.
Or the universe doesn't give you more than you can handle.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah. Be careful what you ask for. Because what are you going to do with it? Even if right now you clap your fingers and you're in a room of aliens, okay, now what? You going to play Sega, Jetta? I mean, what are you going to do with it? Who cares?
Yeah.
But it depends on what you can do to process it. And then I think that's where your angels come in, or your future self, or aliens, or whatever you want. On some level, I think there has to be some dedication as opposed to, I got a checklist to see an alien, and then on Tuesday I want to see unicorns, and then Friday I'm good, right? Let's go back to the beach.
Do you know anyone that's ever seen?
I think right now publicly I wouldn't talk about that. That's their own personal experience.
Well, you don't have to mention their name.
But again, I would still say it's anyone's personal experience. So if you're watching this video and you want to talk about it, I'm more open to it. But until that happens, I think just like in a healing. I asked you, right? We asked them would they like a healing, and they have to say yay or nay. So,
well, I don't have a problem talking about it. And I do know someone that has have seen UFOs on a number of occasions, and they have actually seen and actually been in communication with the alien.
okay.
So that's as far as I'll go. But yeah, I'm not gonna mention the person's name. Is that too much? I just
That's
tease
as far,
everyone?
yeah, those are huge mind
yeah.
F, right?
Well,
way to go, David.
Well, I mean,
I know some Marty.
Yeah.
And that's all I'm going to say,
yeah,
but, you know.
Yeah, I'm not
Until
going
next
to
week.
mention the name. But, and, you know, he probably wouldn't have, he's talked about it openly, so it's not like it's a, you know, he's secret, but I'm not going to mention his name. But anyway, yeah, he came home and they were there in his house.
I have a question for you before we close out.
Okay.
I think this is really funny because it kind of dovetails in what we were just talking about. So a question that I found was, would an atheist, are there any atheists who believe without evidence that aliens exist?
Are there any atheists
Yes.
that believe?
What do you think about atheists?
That's a good question.
Right?
Do atheists believe? I mean, if they don't believe in God, do they believe in aliens?
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
It's a good question.
That's what I want to point out to the atheists out there, because, you know, there's a lot of trolls that will watch the video and trolls in the comments that I usually delete, right? But if you're an atheist, right, hey, join the conversation.
Yeah.
Right? Because what is it? What is the belief, right? I mean, I think they're probably more... just to put my trolling in, they're probably more religious than the religious person.
I know.
Right? Because they're so contrarian, they're trying to prove that God exists.
Yeah.
So it makes me think of...
you would think that if their belief is that God doesn't exist, they wouldn't have anything to do with people talking about it does. You just ignore it. But they're always there fighting and, you know, they're whatever.
Exactly.
And personally, for me, I just find it interesting that if you're having a conversation with an atheist, one of the first things they do, and I think we might have talked about this, is in order to prove their point, they jump in my space, which is a spiritual ability.
Yes.
So right there in that moment, they're already screwing their whole argument over. They're, you know, what they're arguing about is they get right in your face. Space to prove that, you know, God doesn't exist or a spirit doesn't exist. And I was like, wow, you just, you know, that's a spiritual ability you do to get into my space. But no, there's no spirit.
Yeah.
So they don't even realize there's no awareness there. But that's all right. That's where they're at, and I can let them be where they're at.
I do remember reading a Sylvia Brown book where she had a book about all the celebrities that transition.
Yeah.
And one of the stories that applies to this conversation to atheism is George Carlin, who was an atheist, right? So, you know, once he transitioned, he just goes, "You gotta be kidding me." Like, right when he... After he transitioned, he sees this other plane of existence.
Yeah.
And then everybody, you know, had a beer and laugh because, right, we incarnate to experience different things. So maybe everyone incarnates at one point to probably be an atheist because you want to prove, hey, I am so far away from source, or how far can I get away from source?
Yeah.
Right? Because you can't ultimately get away, right?
Yeah,
if we're all part of that.
Later, exactly.
Yeah. So one last thing, we were talking about seniority. So, you know, we tried to put some levity into the conversation, but I think seniority is huge. And I think, you know, we were talking before that some people may hear things and think, hey, I'm speaking with an alien, and give up their seniority. So do you want to share anything about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of people that, you know, hear voices or have that innate ability to hear spirit, as they say, clairaudience. And, you know, if in that experience, they're thinking that, wow, who's this talking to me? Is that God? Is it, who is this or that? But there's just a tendency when you hear voices, especially if it's, you know, a powerful or authoritative voice, to give up your seniority, to like, oh, I need to do whatever this voice tells me. Kind of like what was it, Son of Sam.
Okay.
Yeah, he was hearing voices.
Mm-hmm.
You know, of course, I said he was crazy, and it was coming from his dog or whatever he thought. But yeah, I mean, people will, and understandably, especially if you don't have the information about what's going on, like, kind of me and you do. If you started hearing a voice, well, what would you do? Probably the first thing you'd do is you'd say hello to that spirit, right? That being but if you don't have that kind of information to know how to do something like that, well, then yeah, I could see a person giving their seniority up and that becoming more important to them than they are to themselves.
Awesome. And so, for as an outlet, you can reach out to us, and some people have. Thanks for the great comments and such. Check out Berkeley Psychic Institute. Check with your spiritual community locally, and you should never think that you're alone out there with anything.
Psychic Horizon.
Psychic Horizons in Boulder, Colorado. I mean, there's countless resources
Schools,
online that you should. You can definitely reach in your own neighborhood that you can kind of touch. I don't think you should ever feel like you're alone, especially if you're talking about subject matter like this, and you may feel like you're being attacked, just personally, right? If you're going through an experience where it's outside of your control, we're saying the universe gives you what you can control. But if you need outreach, I think that's really important that you seek it, as opposed to balling up in the corner. I don't think that's going to help anyone. But I think ultimately, in closing, that you should definitely have your own seniority. I don't think anyone can push you further than you allow them, and that goes for your third dimensional beings and extraterrestrials.
Yeah.
So
open mind too.
Yeah, so definitely keep an open mind. Hope you enjoyed this podcast. We are out of here. I am Hamza.
I'm David. Have a great week.
All right, have a good week, guys. Peace.
Out.